We've got to be willing to do uncomfortable things to create more hope. We do. And I hate saying it because we're human, and humans are programmed to seek comfort. Biologically, psychologically, we go to the things that make us comfortable, which means we have to make a choice to do uncomfortable things. Sometimes you have to position yourself in uncomfortable places and be a witness. I've been representing death row prisoners for some 30 years. I've had some wonderful moments. We've had a lot of people walk out free after being wrongly convicted. I've seen people wrongly condemned find their freedom. It's been glorious, but I will tell you, I've had some difficult days as well. A few years ago, we had a lot of executions in my state, and we made a commitment to represent anybody who didn't have a lawyer facing execution. And I got involved in a case where a man was facing execution in 30 days, and the man, I learned, was intellectually disabled. And I went to the courts and I said, you can't execute this man because he suffers from intellectual disability. Our courts have banned the execution of people with intellectual disability. But when I got to the court said, too late, should have been raised earlier. I said, no, it's not too late. The court said, no, it's too late. And the state court said too late. The appeals court said too late. The federal court said too late. And I found myself getting frustrated because on the day of the execution, we had not stopped the execution. And I was pacing back and forth in my office about an hour before the scheduled execution. And finally, the United States Supreme Court clerk called. And they told me that our motion for a stay of execution had been denied. Too late. And then I did the hardest thing I have to do in my work. I picked up the phone and I called this man to tell him, I said, I cannot stop this execution. I'm so sorry. And then that man did the thing that I fear most. That man started to cry. And then he started to sob. And through his tears, he said to me, he said, Mr. Stevenson, please don't hang up. He says, I've got something really important I got to tell you before this happens. I said, of course. And then that man tried to say something to me, but in addition to being intellectually disabled, he had another challenge. When he got nervous, when he got overwhelmed, he had a speech impediment and he would start to stutter, and all of a sudden he could not get out a single word. And he kept trying to say something. He kept trying to say something, but he kept failing. And the harder this man tried to talk, the more he was just ripping my heart apart. And before I realized that, I was standing there holding the phone with tears running down my face. And he kept trying, and he kept trying, and he couldn't get the words out. The guards were trying to speed him up, which just made it worse. And I was in agony. And all of a sudden, my mind wandered. I remembered when I was a little boy going to church one Sunday and being with my friends and talking and seeing a little skinny kid I'd never seen before. And this little boy wasn't saying anything. And I remembered on the night of this execution asking that little boy, I said, what's your name? Where are you from? And then I remembered how that little boy couldn't get his words out either. And he tried to respond to my question and he couldn't get his words out. He stuttered terribly. And then I remembered doing something really ignorant. I laughed. And my mother saw me laughing at this little boy, and she gave me this look I'd never seen before. And she came over and she pulled me by the arm and she pulled me aside. She said, Brian, don't you ever laugh at somebody because they can't get their words out right. Don't you ever do that. And I tried to apologize. My mom said, no, Brian, you know better than that. And then my mother looked at me. She said, now you go back over there and you tell that little boy you're sorry. I said, okay, Mom. And I took a step and my mom grabbed me by the arm. She said, wait, after you tell that little boy you're sorry, I want you to hug that little boy. I kind of rolled my eyes, but I said, okay, Mom. And I took a step and then she grabbed me by the arm again. She said, wait, after you hug that little boy, I want you to tell that little boy you love him. I said, Mom, I can't go over there and tell that little boy I love him. And she gave me that look again. So I said, all right. And on the night of this execution, what I remembered was going over to that little boy and saying, look, man, I'm sorry. And then I remember lunging at him and giving him my little boy version of a man hug. And then I remember trying to say to this child as insincerely as I possibly could, I said, look, man, I don't know. I love you. And what I'd forgotten was how that little boy hugged me back. And then I remembered how he whispered flawlessly in my ear, he said, I love you too. And I was thinking about that while this man was trying to get his words out before this execution. And finally, the man got his words out. He said, Mr. Stevenson, I want to thank you for representing me. And then he said, I want to thank you for fighting for me. And the last thing that condemned man said to me was, Mr. Stevenson, I love you for trying to save my life. He hung up the phone. They pulled him away. They strapped him to a gurney and they executed him. I hung up the phone. I said, I can't do this anymore. It's too hard. It's too hard. It's too uncomfortable. I was thinking about how broken he was. And I had this question I couldn't answer. And my question was, why do we want to kill all the broken people in this country? What is it about us that when we see brokenness, we want to crush it, we want to hurt it, we want to kill it? And then I realized that all of my clients are broken people. I represent the broken. My clients have been broken by poverty, broken by despair, broken by trauma, broken by drugs, broken by neglect, broken by abuse. And then I realized that I work in a broken system because the people who have power are often unwilling to get proximate. They're locked in narratives of fear and anger. They've lost their hope. They won't do uncomfortable things. And in that moment, I said, you know what? I can't do this anymore. It's too hard. It's too much. And I sat down and I said, I can't do it. Can't do it. And I was sitting there thinking, and I was just thinking, and then all of a sudden I had this realization that I hadn't had before. All of a sudden I began to realize something I hadn't thought about before. And what I realized shocked me. And what I realized is that I don't do what I do because somebody has to do it. It was a shock to me. I realized why I do that night, what I do. I realized I don't do what I do because I've been trained as a lawyer. I don't do what I do because somebody has to do it. I don't do what I do because it's about human rights. I don't do what I do because I get to go to court. I don't do what I do because somebody's got to do it. I realized that night something I'd never realized before, and what I realized is that I do what I do because I'm broken true. And the reality came to me, and I heard God saying, my grace is sufficient. And then I realized that when I'm weak, that's when I'm strong. And then I began to understand some things about brokenness. And what I learned about brokenness is that broken people are the people that are really going to show us how grace works. It's the broken that will teach us how redemption works. It's the broken that can show us how compassion works. It's the broken that are going to lead us to that place of justice.
If you can just keep believing when nothing in you is working,